Today's video is about the top 3 cases where ghosts have solved their own murder. Let's dive right in story form. In January 1897, Zona Hester Shue was found dead by her neighbor lying at the bottom of the stairs inside her home in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. Her body was contorted in a very unnatural position, so her neighbor thought this was just a bad accident, and the authorities were called right then and there. Just 3 months before her death, Zona had met a blacksmith named Erasmus Shue, and she fell for him quickly. Her mother, Mary Jane, didn't really like him, but to support her daughter and for her daughter's sake, she was growing to like him, and within a matter of weeks, they were married. She was so happy and excited to start her married life, but 3 months later, she was found dead at the bottom of the stairs. When her husband Erasmus came home to find a group of people standing right outside his house, he was shocked to learn about what happened to his wife. He was yelling and screaming her name, making a scene in front of everybody, and visibly distraught, he carried her body to their bedroom and placed her on their bed gently. He stroked her hair and wrapped her neck with her favorite scarf. Then he put a blanket over her body and paced the room, trying to make funeral arrangements. Erasmus, sitting on the floor, stared at Zona's body for a very long time, until he heard a knock at the door. He shot right up and went to go see who it was. He opened the door just a crack. It was the coroner that was sent by the authorities. He wanted to investigate and examine Zona's body. Erasmus didn't open the door any wider. Instead, he told the coroner that this wasn't a good time, that he should come back later. The coroner looked at Erasmus and flatly said that he needed to look at the body, and he wasn't going to leave without doing his job. So Erasmus hesitantly opened the door and wiped a tear off his face. The coroner stared at Erasmus's dry eyes and looked at him suspiciously. When they both approached the room, the coroner could feel Erasmus right behind him. When the man tried to uncover Zona's body, Erasmus leapt towards him, yelling at him that he needed to get out. He was angry and filled with rage. Erasmus kept yelling at the coroner to get out of his house, and the coroner didn't have much choice. He did leave, but he was very suspicious of him. After the coroner left, Erasmus called Zona's mother, Mary Jane, right away, letting her know that the funeral would be held the next day. She thought it was pretty rushed, and she didn't understand why her son-in-law was rushing to bury her daughter's body. She thought maybe this was just his way of mourning. So the next day, family and friends gathered to mourn Zona Shue. But Mary Jane couldn't help but notice Erasmus's odd, erratic behavior. He wouldn't let anyone near the casket, as if he was guarding it. And that's when Mary Jane started to feel uneasy. She had this odd feeling that maybe he had something to do with her daughter's death, and when the coroner was finally allowed to examine the body, with Erasmus controlling the whole process, they learned that Zona had been pregnant, and he ruled Zona's death a complication from pregnancy, which really crushed Mary Jane because the possibility of a grandchild was also taken from her. At the time, investigating deaths that were already ruled wasn't common practice, and that night, Mary Jane had a horrible dream. She was inside her late daughter's house, sitting at the dining table. Her daughter Zona was serving her tea, but she was oddly quiet. In the dream, Mary Jane asked Zona what was wrong, but her daughter didn't answer. Instead, she came over to the dining table, sat across her mother, and spoke. "Erasmus says he doesn't like my cooking. Look what he did." But before her mother could say a word, she watched her daughter's head turn slowly. Her neck began to crack. Mary Jane watched in horror as her daughter's head spun 180 degrees before going back to normal and facing her. That's when Mary Jane woke up and shot up from her bed. She was confused, breathing heavily and fast. She didn't understand the dream. She didn't think much of it until she had the same dream the next night, and then the next night. This lasted several nights until she was finally convinced that Erasmus had something to do with her daughter's death. So one morning, Mary Jane went to the local prosecutor, John Alfred Preston, to reopen Zona's case. Little did she know that John was already receiving messages and tips that maybe Zona had been murdered. She was a young, vibrant, healthy girl with no health issues prior to her death, so none of this made sense. When Mary Jane arrived at the station, she was ready for a fight. So when she proposed to John that they exhume her daughter's body, he agreed. She felt shocked, but also justified that maybe her intuition was right. That afternoon, John went to the coroner to ask him a few questions about the examination and what he thought of Zona's death. When John approached Dr. Knapp and asked him about the process, the doctor said, "Well, I wasn't able to do a complete autopsy. Erasmus wouldn't let me." John was instantly concerned and asked the doctor why Erasmus wouldn't let him do his job. The doctor told him that Erasmus was very particular about what could and couldn't be examined, and this made John highly suspicious and confirmed his next decision to exhume Zona's body. It was justified because Dr. Knapp was prevented from doing a full autopsy, which was illegal. Less than a month after her death, Zona Shu's body was exhumed on February 22nd. It was transported to a one-room schoolhouse. At the time, they didn't have a proper facility to actually do this process. Dr. Knapp led the autopsy, which lasted 3 hours, and when he was done, he approached John, who was standing outside the schoolhouse, and spoke. "I'm afraid your suspicions are correct. Her neck is broken, and her windpipe is smashed." He paused for a brief moment. "There appears to be finger imprints all around her neck. It appears she was strangled, John." Zona's neck had been so badly broken, it was dislocated between the first and second vertebrae. Right then, John immediately notified the rest of the authorities, and together they headed towards Erasmus's house. That afternoon, Erasmus was in the middle of packing his bags when he heard someone banging on his door, and when he opened it, John told him about his arrest, and they immediately took him in. He sat in prison for a very long time, and 5 months after Zona's death, the trial started, and during the trial, certain details about his life came to light. He had been married twice before. His first wife divorced him because he was cruel in their marriage. His second wife passed away under mysterious circumstances that were never really investigated. On June 22nd, Mary Jane took the stand as a key witness. The only evidence she had were the dreams in which Zona explained that her husband killed her. She was convinced that he did it. Erasmus's lawyer tried to make Mary Jane sound like she was speaking nonsense, but she didn't waver. She kept her story straight, and she explained everything that she saw and heard in her dreams in great detail. And ultimately, the judge sided with Mary Jane. He couldn't discount the dreams, and at this point, everyone believed Mary Jane, and they believed that Zona had been murdered by her husband, and Erasmus was found guilty of murder on July 11th. One afternoon in February 1977, Teresita Basta, who was a respiratory therapist at Edgewater Hospital just outside the city of Chicago, was found deceased in her apartment building. She had been brutally attacked, but there was no evidence of anyone breaking in. Teresita came to the United States in the 60s hoping for a better life. Music was her passion, so while she was working as a respiratory therapist, she was earning her master's degree in music. Her neighbors would ask her if she could offer piano lessons to their children, and she often did. She was a quiet, caring woman who enjoyed a quiet life. That Monday afternoon on February 1977, Teresita got a phone call from her friend Ruth. They talked for about an hour, discussing tidbits of their life, their weekend plans, and Teresita mentioned that someone was going to be coming over to fix her television that was broken for a few days. Ruth teased her about not being able to watch TV, and afterwards they said their goodbyes and hung up. But little did Ruth know that this was the last time that she would ever hear Teresita's voice. An hour after the phone call, the Chicago Fire Department was at Teresita's apartment, and a neighbor noticed the smoke coming out from the window, and they called the fire department right away. The fire department expected a routine fire, and as they were putting it out, when they entered the bedroom, they found something shocking. One firefighter saw a leg coming out from underneath the burnt mattress. Shocked, he ran towards the body and called for help. The firefighters notified the police and an investigation began right away. There was no evidence of SA and no physical evidence that pointed towards whoever could have done this. When an investigator went into the charred apartment, they ransacked the entire place looking for clues. They were throwing furniture and flipping through Teresita's belongings, and because the apartment was burnt so badly, they didn't expect to find anything until they checked her desk. Among the burnt wood, they saw a partially destroyed journal, and when they opened it, the last journal entry was made by Teresita that read, "Get tickets for AS." Who did those initials belong to? They didn't know, but that's all they had to go on. Days went by with no leads. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. 5 months after Teresita's death, one afternoon, a woman named Remy Chua, who used to be Teresita's co-worker, was pouring a cup of coffee for her husband, Jose Chua Jr., as she was drinking her own. Her husband came down the stairs, and as he was about to read the newspaper, he noticed Remy just standing in the middle of the kitchen with a distant expression on her face. "You okay?" But she didn't say anything. Jose asked Remy again, but this time, his wife spoke in a different voice and tone. "Doctor, I want to ask for your help. The man who murdered me is still out there. Please, please help me." Stunned, Jose got up and rushed towards Remy and put his hands on her shoulders and gently shook her. Just then, Remy fluttered her eyes and asked her husband what happened. She didn't remember anything after pouring him a cup of coffee. The next day, while the couple was getting ready for bed, Remy was about to lean over and kiss her husband's forehead when she went into a trance again. This time, Jose asked who was speaking to him, and his wife, in a different voice and tone, responded, "Ako y Teresita Basta." Jose, shocked, knowing what happened to Teresita, sat there staring at his wife, stunned. He reached over to touch his wife's hand and felt that it was ice cold. "Don't be afraid. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I need your help. The man who murdered me is still out there. Please help me." The next night, Teresita appeared again through Remy, but this time, she revealed the name of her murderer, Alan Showery. Both Remy and Jose knew who this man was. He was Remy and Teresita's co-worker at Edgewater. The couple called the police and informed them that they knew who murdered Teresita, and when they arrived, they sat them down and told them that Alan Showery had gone to Teresita's apartment that Monday to fix her TV, but instead, he brutally attacked her, stole her jewelry, and set her apartment on fire and fled. The officers were confused and asked the couple how they could possibly know these details if they weren't there to witness it, and Remy responded by saying that she had visions of Teresita telling her all of this. The officers were skeptical and they didn't really believe the couple, but this was the only lead they had, so they followed it. They reluctantly thanked the couple, and after getting a search warrant, they were knocking on Alan's apartment door. When they went inside, they searched everything, and after several minutes, they found a ring and a necklace that belonged to Teresita. They had photographs to match the jewelry. Alan was arrested, and he went quietly, which made the police think that he had something to do with this. Now, Alan did try to get this case thrown out because the police didn't have any concrete evidence linking him to the crime. The only thing going against him was Remy's visions, and Alan's lawyers tried to make it seem that Remy was faking it, that his arrest was illegal. The prosecutors couldn't ask Remy to take the stand so they could cross-examine the voice, so it was determined a mistrial. But one afternoon in 1979, 2 years after Teresita's death, Alan decided to plead guilty. With that, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison, but he was out on parole in 1983. In 1827, a young woman named Maria Martin was found deceased by her parents, buried in a red barn in Suffolk, England. She had been shot. No one knew who could have done this or why this even happened. Maria was a 24-year-old vibrant woman who fell in love with a man named William Corder. The two kept their relationship a secret, though, mainly because William didn't really want people to know that he wasn't single. Their relationship was toxic. Several months after starting their affair, Maria became pregnant, and William didn't really show any excitement. He didn't really show any care towards Maria. If anything, he looked bothered. He always told Maria's stepmother, Anne, that he was going to marry her daughter one day. He would even show up at their door holding a bouquet of flowers for Maria to make it seem that he was truly in love. Maria eventually gave birth to their child, but unfortunately, the child passed away under mysterious circumstances. Without saying a word to anyone about the birth, both Maria and William buried their child behind Maria's house one afternoon. They filled the grave with dirt and placed a single flower on top of it. William patted the grave and walked away, and this was the last time they ever spoke of it. A few months later, in May 1827, William knocked on Maria's door, who was sitting at the dining table with her stepmother. When she opened the door, she noticed that William was in a very cheery mood. Little did she know that he had just lost his brother Thomas to an illness along with his father. His two other brothers had also passed away within months of each other, and now he was in charge of the family farm. "Let's run away together and get married," he told Maria when she opened the door. The look on his face was odd. This wasn't the look of a man in love. Maria felt strange, but she badly wanted to be with him. Still confused, she asked why rush into this. William told her that there was a warrant out for her arrest for bearing their child and having illegitimate children, which was frowned upon at the time. This made Maria panic because who could have told the authorities about what they did, and she agreed to run away with him. William told her to meet him at the Red Barn that night, which was about half a mile from Maria's cottage. He instructed her to wear men's clothing so she wouldn't be discovered. Maria agreed to all of this, and that night at 9 p.m., wearing men's clothing, she gathered a few of her belongings and put them in a knapsack. She quietly walked out of her bedroom, gave her stepmother a kiss on the forehead, opened the front door, and walked out into the cold night. Her stepmother did tell her not to go, but Maria told her that she'd be all right. This was the last time she was seen by her stepmother, or anyone for that matter. The two lovebirds disappeared. William would often write letters to Maria's stepmother, Anne, letting her know that Maria was sick, that she couldn't visit this time or that time, making excuses. And after several months, Anne woke up one night after having a vivid, horrible nightmare. She saw Maria standing next to her bedside, whispering the words "Red Barn" over and over again. And the thing was, she kept having these nightmares over and over again, the same one telling her about the Red Barn. And after the third or fourth dream, Anne convinced her husband that they needed to go to the Red Barn to investigate what was going on. After having that last nightmare that very day, Anne and her husband went to that Red Barn. They got permission from the landowners to possibly dig. When they arrived at the Red Barn, somehow Anne knew where to point. She pointed to the corner of the barn where the grain was kept and told her husband to dig right there. Without questioning his wife, he plunged the shovel into the soft soil and started to dig. After scooping a few shovels of dirt, his shovel hit something in the ground and he stopped right away. He got down on his hands and knees and started to scoop the dirt with his hands, and that's when he discovered the remains of his daughter, Maria. Anne knew that the last person to take Maria to the Red Barn was William, so a manhunt ensued. Authorities tracked down William in London and discovered that he had married someone else, that he was leading a completely different life. He was taken back to Suffolk, and on August 7, 1828, the trial started. To avoid a mistrial, he was indicted with multiple charges. He claimed that he heard a gunshot from the Red Barn that night, and when he went inside to look, he saw Maria lying on the ground next to a gun. He claimed that she did this to herself, but some witnesses did come forward, saying that they saw William carrying a gun and a pickaxe that night. On August 11th, William was led to the gallows in the next town over, and his last words were, "I am guilty, and my sentence is just. May God have mercy on my soul." If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss any more chilling, mysterious, and strange stories. And I'll see you in the next one.